Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSPmagazine. You're about to experience the other society. Prepare yourself for an independent, unscripted, and unedited conversation about the past, present, and future of the relationship between technology and humanity. Our goal is to share information and inspire action so that technology can be utilized to make our world a better place for everyone. The Other Society is not just a vision, it is a movement, and you can join it. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
And just like that, we are in the Other Society. Welcome, everybody, for a new episode of our Smart Cities series. This is episode 2 of 3 planned. We're going to get into more of those soon. I'm going to take this moment to welcome everybody. This is, as I mentioned, the Other Society, where we bring together experts to talk about the things we need to talk about for our future, where technology can help us live in a world that we want to live in, and where technology serves us and not the other way around. It's all about humanity, and we have the power to define what that looks like. Today's topic is around smart cities, and we're doing a series of three conversations. The first one was an introduction of what is a smart city. We looked at what's it all about. What's the genesis of a contemporary city, and how does that come together? We explored some of the issues that we're facing today in creating and defining and developing smart cities, and we identified some of the challenges that come along the way with that. In today's episode, we're going to get into the tech deep dive, which I'm excited about. I'm a nerd by nature, and we're going to figure out what's involved from a technology perspective when it comes to building a smart city. So without further ado, I want to take a moment to introduce my co-host who's going to help lead and also participate in today's conversation, Dr. Jonathan Reichental. He was not only the former CIO of the city of Palo Alto, so he knows a little bit about what a city is and what a smart city is, but he also wrote the book, and not just one book on smart city, multiple books, and not just books for me, the dummy, but books for kids as well on smart cities. So it's an absolute pleasure, Jonathan, to be part of this with you. Let's get dirty in tech and figure out what it's going to take to build a smart city that we all want.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. It's great to be here again. Episode 2. We had a fantastic response to episode 1. So we're talking about things I think that matter and things that people are interested in. So I think we're in the right place. And this will take us then next month to the final of these 3 episodes where we talk about the future. So today's really cool because, as you say, we're going to get into the weeds a little bit, get into the tech. This is an episode all about urban tech, how it's been implemented, who are some of the players, what are some of the challenges, and actually looking a little bit about where technology is headed in support of building better communities and better cities. So I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation. And in that conversation, I want to introduce our guests today. I'll first start with Benson Chan. He is the Chief Operating Officer for a company called Strategy of Things. He's a co-founder. It's his company. So welcome, Benson.
Good to be here, Jonathan.
Good to have you. We have Reichental Paramel, who is the CEO and co-founder of Strategy of Things. Wonderful to have you here too. Welcome, Reichental.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Sean.
But we are missing one gentleman, Michael Peggies. He is the Chief Information Officer at the City of Aurora. And as happens in life, he has a bit of an emergency. We hope he's going to do fine, and his family will be fine. And unfortunately, he couldn't make it, but we'll have him back. We'll see him again. So best of wishes to you, Michael, and your family. By the way, it's been a month since we chatted, Sean, and we had our first show. And it's been a very busy month, a quick month. since I spoke to you last, I traveled over to Saudi Arabia, actually, and went to Riyadh, city of 7 million people under construction, and then headed over to El Medina, the second holiest city in the Islamic community, and very different experiences in both. It was my first visit to Saudi Arabia, but this is a country that is preparing to emerge onto the global stage. They are changing rapidly, really rapidly, adopting progressive strategies around how they're building their cities, and looking ahead more so than maybe looking behind. And also, I wanted to let you know that Benson was there as well in El Medina. We do work closely together, so it was fabulous. And maybe he'll share during our conversation today some of his insights on that visit. So what took me there, by the way, was urban tech related activities and some work. And the Middle East and the Gulf states in particular are very active in building better communities and better cities. So a lot of work going on there. So let's get the conversation started. And I'm actually going to start with you, Benson, if you wouldn't mind. I wanted to kind of get from you, to set the stage a little bit, how you would sort of rate and evaluate the state of urban tech in cities today. What are you seeing as you work with cities all over the place?
I think in terms of their state of tech, it's kind of all over the place, varies from city to city, large cities, small cities. When people talk about, hey, let's go and do all these smart city things, I would say, well, you've got to look at your base infrastructure. A lot of this tech really it needs to be modernized, needs to be outdated. There's certain things that they just keep the lights running, but they haven't changed in quite a while, right? Because, hey, it works. Why should we change it? I say there's a lot of that, and it's not unlimited budget or resources out there. And so when you go to larger cities, in some areas, they're surprisingly up to date. In other parts of the city, boy, they're still running. You're still running that, So it's kind of all over the place. So there's not any one statement you can say, oh, they're all up to date, or no, they're not up to date. You'll see some cities that are saying, we need to move some workload off into the cloud, right? So they're making some good progress there, and there's others that they haven't started that journey. So when we talk about the current state, it really depends. Within the cities, they themselves have quite a bit of variability or variation. And if you look from large cities to small cities, the larger cities tend to have a larger budget. Of course, they have more resources, so they tend to be a little further ahead. But I wouldn't say that that was way far ahead. I think you have to be pretty visionary to kind of plan and think that far ahead. But generally, it varies. Right?
Yeah, good points. It's what I'm seeing as well. Reichental, from your perspective, how would you rate where we're at in terms of the movement? The adoption of tech and new tech in our cities. Do you think we're at the beginning? Are we midway through? Are we near the end? How would you think about where we're at with cities getting to a good place?
It's a very interesting question, Jonathan. I think cities using technologies is always going to be a continuous process, because if you think of cities comprise of several different agencies, and each of these agencies have a different activity, purpose, or system that they're using to kind of use technology to help their business activities. Some of these systems were implemented 10 years back, some 20 years back, and some as recent as 5 years, right? So you're going to see a different level of maturity, and the system that was implemented perhaps 20 years back or 15 years back may not have the kind of interesting capabilities that you want to have today. Mm-hmm. So they are pretty much getting ready for modernization. So, when you look at cities, I think you have to kind of, like Benson said, look at large cities, look at small cities. But then once you start looking inside the cities, you also need to think about when did they start embracing technology? And, every one of them between the departments could be a different stage. So there's some of those operational inside-facing things that needs to happen. But again, like Benson said, there's a lot of external-facing things that you could also be doing. For example, while a city may not be as advanced in doing some of their internal technology efforts, they may have very good infrastructure outside. They may be using some smart technologies. So these things don't necessarily always correlate to each other, but they're all kind of interrelated in some form or shape.
Yeah. Sean?
Yeah, I'm wondering here, because we're talking about technology, and we used the move to a cloud as a sign of transformation, and I'm just wondering, is that a technological sign of becoming a smart city? or do we need to actually reach a certain level before we can then turn that infrastructure into something smart? Or kind of what's that flow?
Well, actually, let me take a stab at that too. I'm playing the CIO role here because Michael Pegues wasn't able to join us. And I'm looking forward to Benson and Renel's perspective on this as well. Cloud computing was an interesting choice that you used sort of as a way of defining perhaps where a city is. And I'll tell you my quick story. As I think a lot of people know, I was the CIO and CTO for the city of Palo Alto here in Silicon Valley. Joined in about 2011, and one of the reasons I was hired was to help the city and the city staff think differently about how you could use tech to drive some of our solve some of our problems and get the kind of outcomes that the community was looking for. And so they wanted me to have a pretty progressive and bold agenda, which we did. And there were two principles among some others. There was two core principles. One would be that we would be a cloud-first city, and we would be a mobile-first city. And mobile in this case, I'm referring to like apps and mobile phones, not transportation. And so back in 2011, by the way, these two concepts in a public sector context were still very cutting edge. In the private sector, there was already a lot of progress. Public sector, not so much. And I want to super focus here on the cloud computing piece, because what I found was, like a typical city, we had a data center full of servers and all the hardware that typically you'd find on premises that would provide the services for the organization. And like so many cities, a lot of the servers were out of date. A lot of them hadn't been patched or didn't have their service packs. The software was old. They were not on the current versions. And in every way, it was expensive. It was difficult. And of course, we had all the limitations. And I said, my thesis was probably cloud computing was a good solution for government, because we're not experts at that stuff. And there's always too many priorities. Why don't we effectively, in quotes, outsource our applications and really focus on the higher value work like project management and communications and the data science work that needed to be done? Like, let's shift over a period of time our work to those areas as an IT organization. And again, it was back in 2011, it was pretty novel. So over the course of the next few years, we did move a lot. When I left in 2018, I think we were up at about 80% of all IT was cloud-based. And I came to the conclusion that cloud was one of the greatest gifts for government, that we could do higher value work and not have to worry about the patching and the upgrades and the security and the support and everything that goes with running your own data center. Now, it's not for everything and it's not for every entity, but I think, to get to the point here, a public sector entity that does move and have a very progressive cloud strategy is on the right path, and I'm very supportive of that. So, Renel or Benson, agree, disagree, or do you have a different perspective?
I would completely agree with you, Jonathan. I think a lot of the cities are they do not have enough IT resources. If you're a big county or if you're a big city, then you have a big IT staff. But otherwise, I know for a fact in a lot of the cities close to where I live, there's like anywhere from 2 to 10 people who are IT staff. So if you have 2 to 10 people as IT staff, how are they going to provide you tech support, cloud migration strategy, IT strategy, and all the innovation things that we're thinking about? It's going to be quite hard to do that. So I do feel that any kind of technological advancement where you don't have to manage a lot of operational infrastructure is a good thing. Why should people be aware of, hey, I need to make sure that I have the best servers every 3 years so that I have to keep up to date with all that knowledge. All I need to know is, can I get the computing or storage or whatever requirement that I need for my application? I don't need to know if I have the latest server, the best memory, or whatnot. And therefore, I think embracing cloud is definitely the right direction for cities, especially when you're starved with resources. And that takes away their busy time, and allows them to start thinking about, how can I actually help citizens, or how can I make some of these things automated where someone doesn't have to wait for so many days before something actually happens, right? That's where we all want to get to.
Mm-hmm.
Although I think if you look at where the cloud is today and where it was, say, back in 2010, Jonathan, I think at that time, it was relatively new, it was very novel. From a technology company perspective, there are some companies that, they know that that's where this is headed, but they don't want to sell you the cloud, right? Part of it was they still have their traditional business model. They want to sell their stuff. So they're afraid of disrupting what they have, right? So they're afraid to kind of push that. And in fact, I worked at one company where I was, part of the team to create our version of the cloud. Now, internally, the sales team didn't want to sell that, right? Because it would disrupt what they were selling before. Instead of selling something for $10,000, now they had to sell for a couple $100, $1,000, right? So it disrupts their stuff. But then I think the other thing was that the technology was still emerging, right? So people were saying, is the cloud safe? Is the cloud, do we trust it?
Yeah.
And cities don't like to go down too early, right? To take a chance too early, because there's only limited budget and they may be stuck down a path and they may not be able to recover from that if they spent it too early. So they kind of took a wait and see. But if you look at where it is today, it's obvious the cloud is the right choice. Not the right choice, but a good choice, right? And allows cities to innovate and do a lot more than they could. But back then, it really wasn't obvious. And if we extrapolated to, say, newer technologies today, they're kind of right into the same thing. Right? The vendors themselves that are not, that could get disrupted, they don't want to sell those things, right, until they get their version of it. Cities may not want to bite too soon, because is this going to last, or is it not going to last? Is this company going to survive, or is it not? So they're kind of weighing those. Over time, the cloud has made a huge difference, and cities should at least have plans to monitor these new types of technology developments so they could, take advantage of it at the right time.
Now, having said that, I will tell you, I have come across several examples in the past, in my previous life, where the client, in this case, I had a lot of cities and counties with whom I was working. They would insist on having an on-premise version of whatever application they're going after, because they're like, cloud is all good, but I want my source code in my in my facility, in my data center, or in my machine out here. Now, that has changed drastically in the last 5 years, because we've all seen the widespread adoption. So I don't think there's as much of that fear that, hey, I need to have a source code. If I'm spending so many millions of dollars, I want to make sure I have that source code next to me. And there's others who think that, hey, once you start making configuration changes, customization to some of these things, then what does that mean? If I'm on the cloud, that means I'll be forced to use features that they ask me to use, versus I want features that I signed up for in my procurement process, right? So there's a little bit of that misunderstanding that also led to some of these things. So it's getting better and better. But again, cloud is just one technology. I think there's several things that we all need to be looking at to kind of really say that, are we moving the right direction from a technology perspective for cities and counties?
Yeah, I can validate that very point. I've been the CIO or CTO, or actually a senior IT leader in 3 organizations. And in the early days of cloud, it really was about the data center leaders and admin staff and other related, staff who were reluctant. It felt like a loss of control. We don't have the systems in our building that we can actually go and look at and touch and access, directly in the way that they historically. But that, as you say, culture has definitely shifted. Talking of cloud, since we got there, what are some of the solutions, maybe even mainstream solutions, that cities are adopting that are quite common now from a cloud provisioning point of view? Benson, you want to take that?
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of the compute, right, is, you could say, is one area where, let's just say it's tax processing season, right? Tax season, and that you need more, which is coming up. And so, you need more capability, more processing capability to handle that workload. So it's kind of natural to take those applications and offload that to the cloud to support what you need, right? Because the rest of the time this year, you don't really need as much compute. And so that's an example of something, like the retail equivalent would be the holiday season, right? Most of the business picks up at the end of the year. And so same thing for the city's tax season is one example, one big one, actually.
Yeah.
I also think, for cities, especially if there's test environments and training environments and things like that need to be stood up for various kinds of projects, that's a great opportunity to kind of reduce costs and have some flexibility in your capacity. So I think in addition to your classic applications, I think there's also an infrastructure opportunity where the cloud can become very useful for cities to take advantage of.
Great points. Sean?
I just quickly, one of the things I was hoping we could cover in this conversation, and we'll have to do it with words. We'll have to paint with words here, kind of what the technical landscape looks like. So we talked about the tech, right? Or the cloud, sorry. But what does it take to create a smart city? I'll just throw a couple of things out, like sensors, IoT. So what are all the elements, and where do those come from?
So you brought up a very interesting, So smart city. If you think of smart cities, it's more than just one technology, right? Because when you start looking at smart cities, you want to look at the services and operations that a city is doing, as well as what citizens are experiencing on the outside. So what that means is now you're talking about buildings, campuses, roads, many things that encompass a city. So what we did was in our company, we started looking at, how does innovation labs help with an effort like this? So with a lot of our clients, what we have done is we have pitched the idea of setting up an innovation lab. And this innovation lab can then be used to bring an ecosystem of vendor partners. You can bring use cases, you can marry them together and see which problems that a city or a county or a municipality is facing, how those can be solved in a controlled manner, and then you can scale it out. So if you want to explore smart city technologies, one of the approaches we have advised our clients is to take an innovation lab approach. And a live example is one of our clients, a Bay Area county. We helped them set up an innovation lab about 4 years back. We did a bunch of different use cases around parking, streetlights, air quality networks, location analytics, many different things that you traditionally see in a smart city. And we were able to see whether these use cases were giving us the desired results or not. And from that spun out a project that's 2-year long for a smart corridor. So two different cities, between two cities, there's a road transformation effort going on. And on this road transformation effort, we are now putting in smart trash bins, smart streetlights. We're putting in Wi-Fi, we're putting in fiber, we're putting in signage so people can go and kiosks so people can go and interact for information, so on and forth. So there's many layers that needs to be built out to kind of get to the eventual goal. But one of the aspects we tell everybody is, start with an innovation lab, start with the capability, develop it out, and then see how that can be used to address some of the business problems that you're facing within your city.
Yeah. I want to kind of build off of that a little bit. I think when we say smart city, right? So what does that mean, right? So I think that there are like 200 definitions, right? You can come up with every different one, and there's no shortage of technology vendors will bend that definition to their needs, right? But is having connected streetlights, does that make you a smart city? Yeah, sure it does. But how about integrating and connecting all your internal processes? Does that make you a smart city? Sure, that does, right? Does having fiber and running public Wi-Fi through the city makes you a smart city? Yeah, it probably is too. So depending on your goals and outcomes, when we say smart city, people will have very different definitions of what a smart city is, right? So you could, so people may think, oh, there's the Internet of Things portion of it, right? You get your sensors connect to the cloud, right? And maybe that data that's collected from the sensors is then mined and processed and allows you to do some interesting things with machine learning and get some interesting outcomes. But there's also the other part, which is your internal processes, right? Where you're taking some of that information, you're integrating those processes, and you're digitizing the non-digital processes before. You're making services available through a web browser, so someone can access it, over the internet. So that's also a smart city, right? So it's a very broad term. I think one of the things that I always tell people is, when we say a smart city, people don't always understand. Right? Or if you talk to a mayor of a city, well, they say, well, I don't want to build a smart city because I will never get elected building a smart city, but I will get elected by building a responsive city, right? And maybe this is where the technology comes in to allow you to become much more responsive, to do things faster. Street light goes out, you can replace it faster. Or, when the pandemic hit, which I thought was a huge driver, a huge accelerator, all of a sudden you have to deliver services over the internet because people can't come to City Hall anymore. Right, so all of a sudden, that's some of those initiatives are smart city initiatives. Although we don't necessarily associate it with sensors. It was a very broad term, but some of the things that we're talking about here, urban tech allows a city to be much more responsive and agile to whatever comes down. It meets the needs of the citizens, whether it's the better, more effective government services or new services, or allow them to be much more resilient to respond to, say, an emergency or a health epidemic. Right, something like that. So I think that term smart city is used quite broadly, very broadly. And I think we a whole bag of stuff with it.
I think it really depends on, who is initiating the smart city initiative within a city or a county. And what we have seen, so I'll give you a background on this. So when we started off our effort 4 years back, we did a scan of 28 cities, 18 cities in the US and 10 cities internationally. We looked at what was their overall strategy for smart city. What did they do in terms of the top 5 or 10 use cases they adopted? What kind of financing or funding mechanism did they bring in play? What kind of partnerships did they get into with telecom companies or utility companies? And then what kind of skills did they bring in? So we did that kind of preliminary analysis to find out what's really going on out. And what we observed was, in some cities, you had the CIO, like folks like Jonathan, who had the foresight and vision to kind of take certain things and move ahead with it. In other areas, we saw public works playing a primary role, because a lot of construction work and road kind of work, those things are done by public works. So there are some, leaders out there who were a little bit more comfortable adopting technology, and they took the charge and they started moving some of these things. So you are going to find a mixed bag of different folks leading the smart city charge in these cities. What I personally feel is that you almost want to look at some of these smart city initiatives similar to what IT and how IT developed over a period of time, because the need for that is there in every agency, and there's a need at an aggregate level. So everybody has to do a little bit to move forward, but eventually they need to be done in an integrated fashion. So if I'm going to go set up an air quality network somewhere all over the city, and then I'm going to put smart trash bin somewhere, then I'm going to put something else somewhere. The question is, do I want to do this in isolation? Or do I want to do this in an integrated fashion, so that eventually when I want to collect all that data and start cross-tabulizing them or using them in a meaningful manner, it's easy for me. I don't have to go then and unplug everything and figure out, okay, what do I do now? So that's kind of the puzzle that we have out here. You have CIOs taking charge. You have public works kind of folks taking charge. In other places, you'll find vendors coming and saying, hey, let me tell you how to become a smart city. So why don't you put a few of these things? And of course, some cities do not know enough to make good judgment. So they may say, okay, let's go ahead and try some of these things out. So they go halfway through and they get disillusioned, and they may not spend any more money, right? So you see a lot of that happening. One of our goals is to try and educate people on how to approach smart cities more efficiently. We have a smart city framework that we developed, which has various layers. It has an innovation layer at the top, and as you go down, it has technology layer, networking layer, and so on and forth. And as Benson mentioned, our intention is always outcome-based. We have about 7 or 8 different outcomes that we talk about: quality of life, sustainability, public safety. as long as one of these outcomes are being met, no matter what you do within the framework, it's going to add value, right? But smart city, like every other technology type initiative, requires various pieces. It requires a strategy, it requires people, it requires processes, it requires structure, and all of these things take time. So we are at that stage where 5 years back, when we would go and talk about smart cities to a CIO, he would say that's a buzzword, we don't really care too much about it. Today, 5 years later, we're seeing RFPs floating around saying, I want to build a smart city strategy. We're looking for experts to come and tell us what to do. We want people to know what's the trends, where should we invest in, where should we not invest in.
Mhm.
So it's a little bit of a fluid stage, and my belief is that in the United States especially, most of the cities are not large cities. There's only like 10, 20 cities that are super large. All the other cities are small and middle cities. How do we get those cities to be smart efficiently? That's what we should be after.
Mhm. Good. I appreciate all the examples and everything. Thank you for that. Let's kind of move the conversation along. And you kind of touched on it a little bit there towards the end of your comments, Reichental, which is, what are the bigger tech bets that cities should be thinking about to invest in now that'll start to pay dividends in the next 3 to 5 years and beyond? What are the tech that they may not be thinking about that they ought to be thinking about? Benson?
I'll start with a couple. I think it's not new, but I think it's become much more important. Cybersecurity.
Mm.
I think that as we get more connected, as we automate more processes, we integrate more things, more systems, right, whether it's internally or externally, cybersecurity is top of mind, right? So we've all heard about the ransomware attacks, and they're continue to happen. So I think that's an area that it's not new, it's old, but I think we need to pay a lot more attention to it and probably go big, much bigger with it. That's kind of one area. Another area is robotic process automation. Like a lot of different processes that can be accelerated, can be sped up, and there's not enough resources to do everything. Right? So that's another area that I think they can go big with. In select areas.
Maybe just elaborate a little bit. I don't know that RPA is that well understood beyond us and geeky folks.
Yeah. So basically, it's really just a way to say, there are some processes that you do over and over again, right?
Yeah.
So maybe some of those things that you could get software to go and automate. For example, let's just say you're processing payments, right? And you're trying to detect or taking invoices from different vendors, right? How do you know is it fraudulent or not, right? So that's very common. So you could use software, and the idea is use software to scan all the invoices coming in, match it up against your, say, existing contracts and vendors, and see if there's indeed it's a valid invoice. In fact, we routinely get invoices that are submitted by these sham businesses that say, hey, here's an invoice for $250, right? And I'm looking at that. I place no such order, right? And they do that. Imagine at a city level, they get thousands of these, right? So, now you kick it over to, say, finance or accounts payable to look at it. It's a lot of work for them to do it, right? And they're just hoping for someone to just fall for it and just pay for it. Now, you can automate that process of scanning and comparing the inbound invoices with, who you have on contract. Then you can quickly scan out those sham invoices. Right? Same thing for making payments to someone as well, right? Or like what is it? People on assistance payments, right? So there are a lot of fraud in that area, right? So, for example, the health centers or the public health department can use that to determine who's entitled to a service, who isn't. Right? So that's a way to automate that process. So that's an example of robotic process automation.
Yeah.
Common. Well, it's a new thing, right? I think it's not like you have. It's not like we have infinite resources, right? So anytime we can go and automate some common process, that's a huge saving. They could redeploy the people who could work on something else. So that's PA.
It's a great suggestion. As I think about what a lot of the back office work that's done in cities, when I think about it, often it's repetitive. It's important work, but it is repetitive. So RPA I think is a strong fit in government, and I'm confident that the RPA vendors are probably building some good businesses out of it. Rena, what other tech? Benson gave us two. What are yours?
I was going to say, some form of connectivity infrastructure that is seamless across the city, wired and wireless, perhaps, right? Because in some cases it's going to be easy to do wireless infrastructure than wired infrastructure, because you can't pull a fiber cable in every part of the city. But if you can, maybe that's what you need to do. But I think on the wireless side, you have a couple of different options. You have technologies like 5G, which is offering you high bandwidth, lots of options to stream video content and things like that. But at the same time, you may not need a 5G network for every use case for a smart city, right? So if all I'm trying to do is send trash can fill information level, or I just need to send information whether my street light is on or off, I perhaps need very small bandwidth, right, to kind of send that information. So you could potentially some kind of a hybrid model that has connectivity infrastructure for small packets of information as well as high volume of data. I think that's important for a city to consider. Benson and I had worked on an IoT municipal blueprint as a part of a working group a couple of years back, and we kind of recommended how if a city wanted to build out a municipal IoT network, here's some options that you could go after. Now, all of these things always are going to have conflict with, hey, do I do this on my own, or do I just take the service from a private provider? And that is a hard question. In most cases, you want to take it from somebody else because of the reasons that we spoke about earlier. You don't want to maintain, operate, manage, and do all of those things. But if there's new areas where maybe there's not enough service providers to offer you those services, perhaps you do want to try and build some hybrid model where you invest in building out some infrastructure. For example, if your city is in a coastal area, or if your city is in some specific area where the regular traditional providers have not invested money to bring you very good last mile connectivity, what do, right? So maybe you have to proactively invest as a city out there and some infrastructure and see how you can fill that gap. So I think connectivity is something that's really important. Then I feel the other part is, a lot of these new technologies where we're using voice, we're using phone apps. There's parts of that cities have adopted. Like I know I live in Fremont, and when I go to Lake Elizabeth for a walk, I see these little nice QR codes where I can, if there's something not working with the park, or if I found something not functioning, I can take a QR code and I can send that information, and somebody in Fremont is going to look at it, right? So there's those kinds of advancements happening. It's not proliferated enough. I feel there's more and more opportunities for us to kind of do that kind of resident facing or customer facing opportunity. Right now, it's almost like I really have to think, if I have to do something in the city, I have to think through, okay, where do I need to go? What do I need to do? If I don't have prior experience, I have to navigate my way out into that thing, right? So I think there's a little bit of an opportunity for us to make some of those processes better.
Yeah, and Jonathan, I want to take it to you with the similar question, if I can, because I guess I'm wondering, how important is it that whatever gets built has sizzle and pizzazz and touches the citizen or the visitor of the city, versus how much of it is infrastructure, and how did that, maybe some technologies there, and how does that decision get made?
Yeah. Well, we unfortunately don't get to choose. We got to do both. We got to do the stuff that touches people in a very important way, improves their lives, and we have to do the back end boring infrastructure stuff too. We have to do both. The cities that make progress and are making progress right now are those that have a good digital infrastructure. Everything what Reynald was just saying, they've got a good fiber infrastructure, they got good strong wireless. Access to the internet is reaches into almost every part of the community. That's essential. And then on the back end, having the systems and the staff to support that and provide power to things that run the water system and the traffic signaling system. All that stuff needs to be in place. I'm not as if you like, bullish on sort of the sizzle, as you say. Because it's not going to take a lot to impress communities. I say this with great affection for the space and for cities and government. The bar, unfortunately, is a little low, and so we've got to do some core basic stuff, and we'll impress our communities. People want they want good access to the internet. They want high-speed internet to reach everybody. They want to be able to do more of their services digitally, right? There's a growing segment of society now who expects to interact with organizations exclusively on their phones, right? And if you're an organization, a major one like a government, and you don't do that, I mean, it's not even that you're not meeting expectations. It's like it's unacceptable, for a lot of people, right? So I think there's an awful lot to be said about good quality infrastructure across the board. Digitalization, it's got a long way to go. It's a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity, as we know, about $2.4 trillion worth of opportunity by 2025 alone, and it'll only grow from there. I also think that cities need to get into the data business. They've been really late in this. And those that have hired talent, a chief data officer and data analysts, and have brought in tools, and they understand what data they have and how to use it, are making better decisions. They're making better decisions about priorities and how to serve people better. So I would argue that it's important that we invest heavily there. If I was to throw in, by the way, I do this often just to kind of throw everyone off. When I'm asked about, what cities should be investing in and where's, what's one of the big techs, my answer is always a surprise. I say bicycles. It's hard to find an alternative technology, and I call bicycles a technology, e-bikes and on-demand bicycles, and all sorts of bicycles. It's hard pressed to find a technology that is easy to roll out, pardon the pun, plus it has a massive impact on the entire community in so many different ways, from health to transportation to clean air, to convenience, and beyond. So the cities around the world that are building bike lanes, and safe bike lanes, by the way, and are supporting cyclists and taking care of their kids and all that type of thing that's related to it, making the cities more cyclable, easy to cycle,
rideable,
easy to ride in.
are notable and are making a difference in their communities. Let's ask move to Benson and René again, in terms of the work that you guys have done some excellent work in and continue to be leaders around, which is this idea of innovation labs. Now you've spoken a little bit about it previously. We've got that on tape, but maybe just to kind of dive deep again, because it ties into this. As we think about cities adopting tech and making sure the tech is right, and we figure out how to roll it out. Talk about the role of innovation labs and what it'll take for more cities to go that direction. Benson?
Yeah, I'll start with let's define what an innovation lab is, right? Because when we talk about innovation lab, I think people go to a certain place and say, oh, this is what it is, right? But you think about it, innovation lab is really I call it a problem-solving black box. You've got problems that come in. You've got a group of innovators and problem solvers that work together with the people that have the issues. You've got an ecosystem of, say, vendors or solutions providers that can help with that, and they all work together to come up with a solution. And they in this lab, they would then test it out, whether it's a live environment out in the streets or maybe it's inside a lab, and to test the viability of it. And then what comes out of it is a proven or tested solution to a particular set of problems, right? And so that's, when you strip away all the technology and all the different things, that's what an innovation lab is supposed to do. I mean, problems come in, a bunch of people work together to address it, to solve it. They test it out, and what comes out is something that can be, say, that's proven. They can go into procurement or they can be scaled up, right? And that's really, our definition of innovation lab. Now, what you do in there, that's really the secret sauce, right? It's the methodologies, it's the ecosystem of innovators and solutions providers that you bring together, as well as the internal partnerships with the city departments and the external partners that work together and collaborate. Right, so that's kind of at a high level. That's what an innovation lab is. Right, so setting that up is really setting up this capability. Now, when we also talk about innovation lab, we say, oh wow, so for a city to get involved, then we need to build out a lab. Yes, you need to have some kind of capability. And then they say, well, then should I push all the problems into an innovation lab to solve? And they say, yeah, the innovation lab is a catalyst. Right? They come in, they work on certain problems, and then they come up with solutions and do that. But a large city, or even any city, they have more problems than the innovation lab can handle. Right? And so really, the skills, the capabilities that the innovation lab develops, they should push that down into each of the city departments so they can also be innovators. And then that frees up the lab to work on more complex problems, or they can go a little deeper. And then over time, some of those problems get pushed, or capabilities get pushed down to the departments. Right? In this way, the innovation lab is continuing to innovate. The cities have developed the capability so they can continue to innovate, and they have their own ability. But at the end of the day, the innovation lab is this catalyst that allows us to look for these problems. And I think, as you say, Jonathan, you try to solve 20th century problems with 21st century solutions, right? And in some ways, the innovation lab brings this capability to solve these problems in new ways, right? Now, innovation isn't necessarily about technology, although located in Silicon Valley, we mostly associate it with technology, but you can solve problems through, you can innovate with policies, new ways of, or processes, or new ways of delivering a service, right? So those are all examples of what you can do in an innovation lab and how you can innovate, not just with technology, although technology will facilitate and enable that, but you don't always need technology to innovate.
Yeah. And if I could ask you, maybe Reichental, to take the second part of this, and be a little succinct, because we want to get in a few more items before we wrap up today, which is what's holding cities back? Why don't we see every city jumping into this? It makes so much sense.
Primarily, I think I think we spoke a little bit about awareness, that everyone is on the same level of understanding what smart city is and what technology can do for you. The second big piece is funding. These things require money, and you probably know better than everybody else. It's a 2-year budget cycle. So if you want to plan any projects, you have to think 2 years ahead, first of all, to even think about the project. Forget about getting approvals and so on and forth. So who's going to fund it? How is the money going to come? And how am I going to associate tangible results with it? So what we have seen in some of our clients is that initially CIOs or whoever directors who are willing to invest in this approach, they may pony up a little bit of money to start putting a few things, and if they see results, they start increasing the budget for that more and more. And further ahead, when they see that these things are creating more value, they can now start thinking about, okay, what should we do from a long sustainable perspective? So our suggestion has always been, you want to eventually get your departments to keep 0.5% or 1% of their budget for innovation, because you cannot keep catching up with legacy modernization forever. You need to be ahead of the curve. Mm-hmm. Private companies are already doing that. Public sector is just not doing that because culturally the mindset is not there. We always use 95% of all money for operations. Let's put aside some money for innovation, right? So that's kind of that's what we are advocating in most cases. And one more thing I just want to add on to what Benson was saying. You're going to have these ecosystem of partners. You're going to have problems. The important thing is to have what we call innovation champions. So if you're working in a city or a county, like I said, a city and a county, they are like, a dozen different business lines working together, right? Doing their own thing. And so it's important to create an innovation champion type profile or role in every agency who can actually be the person who's collecting the problem sets and then deciding, is this something that we should collaborate with the innovation lab, or is this something that's in-house? Because there's a lot of in-house work that you just need to clean up your stuff first before you go out and start exploring innovation, right? So there's that part also that has to be managed carefully, and that's another beast by itself. So that's the other thing I wanted to highlight there.
Yeah, and I want to use this moment quick. I know, Jonathan, we're getting close to the end, but just a quick thought. Maybe Benson can chime in on this. How does the citizen's voice get heard in all of this? Because there's no lack of technology. Engineers want to build stuff. Cities might get a wild hair and decide they want to actually implement a smart city program. And how does the citizen's voice come in? How do they say, this is what I want for my city? Do they have to visit other cities? Can they visit an innovation labs to see what's possible? And then how do they communicate that?
Yeah, the citizens don't always know, like, hey, I'm going to go to the next city over and I want exactly that. Sometimes they do, right? If the city happens to have that, but they usually say what they want, right? They say, I just want an outcome. I want this. I want less crime. I want better transit options. Right? And they, the best thing they can do is go through their city council members. Now, not everyone's going to go to the city council, right? Some people may say, especially people in the community, they may say, well, I don't want to talk to them, or maybe they're undocumented members in the community, so they're afraid to speak up. They can go through the communities. They're nonprofit to service communities, so they can be the advocate and their voices. Right? The Office of Community Affairs or other channels. So those are ways that they can get their voices heard. And ultimately, I think many cities have community engagement programs. Now, I'm not saying they always do it right? But those are channels that they can go out to their community and get their voices heard, the messages heard. So those are examples of ways. Or, you could still call City Hall, right? That's very common. You can send letters and emails, so people do that. And there are a lot of ways, but those are just ways. But they won't always know to ask, I want this kiosk, I want this smart parking. They just say, hey, I just want to find a parking space. Well, I can never find a parking space when I go there. And then those voices do get heard, right? So as someone like a Jonathan would then say, oh, let's see if I can try to understand the problem. No one can find a parking space, then maybe people aren't moving their cars enough, right? Or maybe they don't know where the parking spaces are. And so then from there, you can push it into an innovation lab or some kind of innovation structure where then you come up with some ideas, solutions, and test those out.
Yeah.
That seems like the next logical step, Jonathan. Yeah, the infrastructure and then a communication channel. That would make a city smart.
If they were both better, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, bring us home.
We ask all our guests this question, and again, if you could succinctly answer it, and you could be as broad in how you think about it. So I'll start with you, Reynal. What needs to happen, in your opinion, to build a better society?
I think there needs to be a lot more transparency and collaboration between people who really want to do something for the society. I think this forum that you've invited us is a very interesting, revealing change for us. But I think there needs to be lots of nodes of these, right? There's only 4 of us. But what if there's hundreds of these nodes, and we're all discussing how to make the society better? And then what if we all get connected? And from that, comes a real outcome. A lot of us talk about things in these forums, but then there's no action that comes out of it, right? Eventually, it's a good thought. It feels good to talk about it, but then you don't really do anything. I mean, I'll give you an example. When we start off the smart city journey, we were always asked, why are you guys doing smart city? And I keep saying, we're in Silicon Valley. We're known to be the creators of the most advanced technological apps, or you name it. But you think about smart cities, we're behind. We're super behind. Why is that? Nobody really cares that much, perhaps. No one has taken that initiative. Then I told Benson, let's do it. Let's go and make it happen. It'll take us 5 years, 6 years, but let's make a difference. So you got to do something about it, right? And then see what happens. So that's my perspective.
Good. Hey, Benson?
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question. I take a few things. I think number one is I think we have to just get involved. We have to participate. You see something, do something about it, right? See something, say something, do something, right? So I think we all have to do that. And over time, if enough people speak up or enough people do something, then we're going to slowly start to, move the needle and start to do things. So that's one. Second thing I think is we need to And I think the pandemic has really highlighted this, right? We need to move away from me thinking to us thinking, right? So instead of thinking about ourselves only, we need to think about the people around us in a broader way, right? So I think that's another thing. And then the third thing is I think we need to hold our leaders, our city council, our politicians, even the people we work for, accountable, right? So until we can hold them accountable, nothing's going to change. So it's really those three things: participate, shift away from me thinking to us thinking, and hold people accountable, including ourselves.
Very nicely said, both of you. And by the way, I wouldn't underestimate the power of voice and talking. Maybe somebody who listens to this today or in the months ahead is inspired to take a different action. So you never know the results of your words. So give yourself some credit. Great dialogue today. Wonderful to have both of you. We covered a lot. We focused, as was the agenda, on the tech elements of the smart city movement. We heard from both Benson and Reichental the power of innovation, of taking action, of building innovation labs, being results oriented. We got deep into cloud computing and the value that cloud has for cities. I think we had a consensus that it's a good direction, and it is underway now, although there was some reservations early on in the decade, perhaps, or last decade, in governments embracing cloud entirely. I think what I'm left with here is a kind of reinforcement of the fact that creating better cities and a better society is multidimensional, and tech has moved into the center, but it's not the only thing, but it is an important thing, and we have to understand the technology too as we move forward and build the other society. So thanks very much to Reichental and Benson. Really appreciate you guys, and I hand you back to Sean.
Yes, thank you, Reichental and Benson and Jonathan. Great conversation as always, and I appreciate your recap there. I think, the infrastructure is key, and communication is key, and the points that both Reichental and Benson touched on are super important in terms of taking action. Great conversation around technology. I mean, there's so much there. We could spend hours and hours and hours, and who knows, maybe we'll take a deeper dive in some of these points. So a nice lead from what is a smart city in general terms, what's the tech that drives it. Hopefully we as humans continue to control the reins of the technology there. We talked about outcome briefly, right? What's the outcome? That's really what the third episode here is about. What's the long view of the potential outcome of all of this? Who's going to take responsibility to shepherd this forward in a way that maps to our ethics and our morals and our policies? And do we need to change those things in any way in order to live in a world with technology that we all want? And my co-founder Marco is going to join Jonathan for that. And I believe you have Leila Al-Hamdrami, Sakargani, and Tia Kansara on for that episode. I'm looking forward to sitting in the wings on that one and embracing and absorbing all of that has to offer. So again, thank you, three of you, for joining us. Best to Michael. Hope all is well there. And thanks everybody for joining us for The Other Society. Stay tuned for the continuation of this series. We have 50 topics lined up, from quantum computing to ESG and everything in between. Stay with us. Hopefully these will drive the action that Reichental talked to. So thanks everybody. See you on the next one.
Thank you very much.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of The Other Society. If you learned something new and this discussion made you think, then share ITSPmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.